From the studios of Cheshire TV in Keene, New Hampshire, it's The Men's Room, a show by men, about men, and for everyone. Sponsored by the Monadnock Men's Resource Center and hosted by Damien Licata and Forrest Seymour.
Hello and welcome to The Men's Show. It's a program of the Monadnock Men's Resource Center, and we're really glad to have you with us, and we have a great guest for you today. My name is Forrest Seymour. This is Damien Licata.
How are you? And thank you so much. I am delighted that you made the Men's Show.
Did I do that? Did I do that? Oh my gosh. Okay, just to rewind. Welcome to the Men's Room. Which is, we're not the men's show. That's some entirely other thing. We don't even know what that is. The Men's Room is our show here.
We are the Men's Room. That's right.
Yep. And it's great to be here. We are supported by the Monadnock Men's Resource Center, which also does a drop-in men's support group that we will talk about a little bit at the end, and also sponsoring a march, men's march against rape and gender violence on April 14th, which we'll talk a little bit about.
Say a little bit more about that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
But we have a great guest, and
we have a great guest, and we just wanted to mention you have in front of you the latest issue of Newsweek, which talks about men and depression.
Men and depression. I mean, it's great to see that
on
the front of Newsweek, that it's getting, men and depression, which is often, I mean, one of the points they appropriately make in the article is that men and depression, I mean, depression in men has often been sort of belittled or pooh-poohed or misdiagnosed, or it's thought that it was a women's disease.
I think that, in terms of, a lot of diagnoses, of, mental illness or, psychological issues in general, a lot of times the research has been, sort of gender biased. And I think depression is one of those areas that have been sort of defined in the feminine in many ways.
Gender bias in the sense that, like, the research was done about women and based on case studies of women and such, so we had the sense of women.
Right, and the result of that, of course, is that depression is sort of under-recognized, or has been historically in men, because it looks different. It
has slightly different characteristics.
Yep,
it tends to be more characterized by anger than like sadness.
That's right. Yep, yep, and just irritability and shutting down. Isolating, much more prevalent.
Things that we sometimes just attribute to men.
To men, just being men.
Yeah, right.
Yep, exactly.
Big, tall, the silent, whatever.
Yep. I should point out that this, like you say, it's great to see this getting this sort of national, attention.
Right.
Yeah. It's not a new issue, though, by any means. This is Terry Real wrote this book, published in 1997, 10 years ago.
10 years ago,
called "I Don't Want to Talk About It: Overcoming the Secret Legacy of Male Depression."
Great title, isn't it? I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it, which is another way that depression looks in men. And I think somewhere in here, in this article, it's referred to as the secret scourge. Male depression. Here it's the secret legacy, or the silent scourge, I think it's called in that. But there's this idea that it's not overt, as overt in men.
Right. Well, or overlooked or something.
Yeah.
So it's great. It's great that it's getting out there.
It is great that it's getting out there, and I think that the more attention that's paid to this, the more I think we'll get some understanding of a lot of other issues around men and men's lives, related to violence, domestic violence, and so on.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
Yep. Yep. So
who do we have for a guest today?
We have a great guest today. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to meet Larry Benequist. Larry's a professor of film studies at Keene State College, right here in Keene. He's the former chair and founder of the film studies program there. PhD at Syracuse University in Renaissance literature.
Well, that's perfect connection.
Yeah, and published author. This I didn't know. Larry's made several documentaries. One called Here Am I believe. And
Jonathan Daniels.
Yep. Send Me: The Journey of Jonathan Daniels, which has been aired on PBS numerous times. And he's a frequent speaker on issues of film and the media, and film and society, which is what we want to talk about today. Right. Larry, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Damien. Thank you, Forrest.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes.
So, and you've done a lot. You've done, as well as all this wonderful stuff, you have also taught courses specifically in men in film, or masculinity in film, and that topic. And so and that is what we'd like to pick your brain
And the students
about.
are interested in that.
Yeah,
and it's not all men in the classes. And often 50% or practically 50% of the students in such classes are women. Hollywood Images of Masculinity was the title of the last one I taught. Started after the Second World War with Sands of Iwo Jima and came up to the present.
Oh, yeah.
And we were reading Susan Faludi's book, Stiffed, a book by an Australian scholar of men in the media, Anthony Easthope, a book called What a Man's Got to Do. And these texts are interesting because they try to show the formations in film of how men see themselves and how they're seen by each other. Yeah. We've heard terms like buddy films, and one term that Faludi uses that I think is very interesting is ornamental masculinity. Perhaps later we could talk about that.
Well, what does she mean by that?
What she means is she believes that since the distinction between jobs which only men can hold as opposed to jobs which women can't do, is since that line is practically diminished now to look at our current army in Iraq, the women are on the front lines. Right. That if men, if they're invested in continuing to keep these delineations between the genders, the job isn't going to do it anymore like it did in the 19th century or say through the first part of the 20th century. Now we need methods of designation that she calls ornamental masculinity. She includes like getting pumped up, tattoos, piercings, earrings, certain kinds of behavior, and so forth. I think there's always been some of that.
Sure. But it's become more important now because there's less in terms of our roles in society to like hang your masculinity on. So now you do it.
Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So she looks at that and sees certain dangers in that. And also what was interesting about Faludi's book, which really surprised me, is that she really there was a great deal of sympathy for the male. She thought that men were having as much of a game run on them and defining their own masculinity and the toll it takes on them as it is for women with dress and certain modes of behavior that for men it's just as bad. And while men might think they have it better, they really don't have it better.
Well, and if you look at like longevity and that kind of stuff, I mean, men are dying earlier, and that's not happening for no reason at all.
No,
There's
exactly.
stress and maybe undiagnosed depression or whatever.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. From what I remember of that book, Stiffed, she was talking a lot about the changes in how men think of themselves and on what they how they define themselves over time. And I'm guessing that since you were looking at that book for your course, that you're looking at also those changes over time of how that translates into film images. Am I right?
Yes. One film that's really seminal to a course like that is the Nicholas Ray film Rebel Without a Cause with James Dean and Natalie Wood, 1954. Because for one of the first times, well, in the 50s, you had three actors who kind of redefined masculinity and moved it into an area of not androgyny, but kind of sensitivity. Well, you had Montgomery Clift as kind of a precursor, but you had Marlon Brando, who Elia Kazan talks about his feminine side and said, actually considered him as an actor bisexual, and by that he didn't mean anything other than the way he presented himself. James Dean, and Elvis Presley, interestingly enough, with that beautiful face of his. In fact, I remember Time magazine had an article about Presley when he first became popular, and they had a picture of Venus de Milo next to Presley's face, and they were, in terms of the formation of the nose and the mouth, they were almost identical. But these portrayals in the 50s showed a different way to be from, say, Clark Gable or John Wayne, who are Humphrey Bogart, who had to suppress his more sensitive side in film after film. It was all right for James Dean to be kind of lying backwards near the end of the film, Rebel Without a Cause, and Natalie Wood is kind of above him, and she kisses him, and she says, "Your lips are soft." So his masculinity isn't defined by
this
aggression or anything like that. Even though we're told that before the film opens, he's aggressive and he keeps getting in trouble, beating people up. But we don't see much of that in the film.
Well, you know, it's interesting as I think about the roles that I've seen, those various actors, both the John Dean and Marlon Brando, and then the others, the earlier ones, Bogart and so forth. I think of those earlier portrayals as having that image of a man who is in control, in charge. You know, those Bogart roles I think of, you know, where he's just like, and there's like almost no doubt portrayed at any time. Whereas I think of Marlon Brando's roles as often confused, you know, men who are confused and don't know, you know, don't have that sense of like righteousness, like I'm the right guy, you know, which seems to me, you know, that is, I can see as a piece of that transition of masculinity from being sort of this idea that men are always in charge, which I think is still there for a lot of us. We all are expected to be in charge. But,
oh yeah.
But then there's this interesting in the 50s, this sort of different image.
Yeah, you think of Bogart in Casablanca when Ilsa says to him, I can't think anymore, you'll have to do the thinking for both of us.
I love that one.
And he says, all right, I will. Just those 4 words.
Yeah.
All right, I will. And he does.
Yeah.
Even a great sacrifice to himself.
Right.
But his love for her manages to get him off the ideological dime and start fighting again for the resistance, which he hadn't been able to do for years. His love for her had dislocated it.
Right.
Yeah. But,
and the woman, and he needed the woman to find that part of him. You know, he was just the detached, selfish, something or other. There had to be a woman to help him find that passion to support the resistance.
Howard Hawks films, the women are really honorary males. He has a lot of respect for women, but they have to play by the men's rules, and the men can't yield on this. They're always doing their job. If they show their emotion, it's through the job. The women can take part, but think of Rio Bravo or To Have and Have Not. How the women in those films have to be ancillary to the men, and then they're accepted, but only if they play by the men's rules. And I mean, Angie Dickinson, in one of my favorite films, is Quentin Tarantino's favorite film is Rio Bravo. He calls it a friend film. He watches it like once every 2 weeks. And I can see why. I mean, I was 19 when that film came out. And what a business of role modeling. There's Ricky Nelson playing Colorado, and there's John Wayne and Dean Martin and Walter Brennan. These 4 guys, all different stages of youth or age or decrepitude or toughness or alcoholism. And this unlikely group bonds together to defeat this bunch of bad guys. In fact, that movie was Hawks' answer to High Noon, the Zinnemann film, which Hawks hated. He thought that was a sellout film. What was he going around town whining to get people to help him? He didn't need anybody to help him. I mean, so he shows John Wayne with an old handicapped man and a drunk and a young kid defeating this big gang. I mean, we can go it alone, we guys. That's what the message of the film.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you? I mean, you know, we talk about this sort of, you know, there seemed, if you look back at those films from the 50s and at Marlon Brando and James Dean, and you could say, well, this is the beginning of a trend towards some different ways of thinking about men and what it means to be a man. But you know, over time, if you look at other periods more recently, the 80s and 90s, for example, and even today, there seems to be a kind of reassertion of this more you know, sort of, you know, hard-nosed idea of what a man is. Do you think that's a backlash to feminism? Do you think that there's it's a natural sort of pendulum swing, or do you even you know, observe that?
Well, if you look, take for example Clint Eastwood. His career, of course, started on television, but really took off when he did those films for Sergio Leone. Then he did similar films for Dirty Harry and so forth, where he played a tough, unyielding, unrelenting masculine individual. But at a certain point in his career, when he started directing films himself, they changed. Do you remember a film called Every Which Way But Loose? With the chimpanzee, the orangutan. In that film, he does not get the woman. She is taken away by a mealy-mouthed, kind of wussy individual who the woman feels she has to look after. And here's Clint Eastwood, who doesn't get the girl. And other films, he's shown to be, like he did a movie it's with Genevieve Bujold, called Tightrope. Same thing. We see his weak side, very much so. And later on in his career, he becomes not ashamed to show his weak side. And the same thing happened to Sylvester Stallone in movies like, what's that one about the tunnel, the Holland Tunnel? And
oh, I remember that.
You know the one I mean.
I know the one you mean, but
right. He's shown to have clearly.
What was it? Copland?
Yes, another one. Right. Where I think as these actors, they move into another phase in a sense where they're not ashamed to show a side that's flawed or weak or, dare we say it, feminine. You know.
Yeah. And I think that's part of that's part of the aging process. I think for a lot of men, I think, is that they sort of become maybe more balanced or more well-rounded. I think with age, in many ways around that thing, or less invested in this image,
more traditional sense
in this
of
more traditional sense of masculinity.
Yeah.
But what I'm wondering about is whether there's also a larger context to those differences in depictions in terms of, you know, have images of are the images that we see in the films a reflection of where society is at the time?
That's a great question. I think I mentioned to you in a note to you about my experience of driving down Beaver Street back in the early '80s when Happy Days was on television.
Yeah,
probably.
With the Fonz, Henry Winkler.
Yep.
And I was driving past the Beaver Street Market, and I noted out my passenger side window a little guy. He was probably 10. With his hair all slicked back, with a leather jacket, but it wasn't leather, it was a plastic leather jacket on, going down the street, raising his thumb, going, "Hey, hey," like the Fonz. And he clearly, in his mind, was the Fonz. I think that happens. I think I mean, there's probably some evidence, you guys would know more about this than I would, I think, about family modeling of behavior, in a sense, being weakened, in a sense, and being more generalized throughout the media. I mean, I've always thought his film was very powerful.
Yeah.
I know it had quite an effect on me when I was growing up. And that was just, there was no television except until later. I can't imagine what it's like now.
Yeah. I think anybody with children can appreciate, you know, the competition that parents have for influence over their children with the you know, the wider society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So you're making this point that there is this trend in some male actors, directors' lives where they move towards a more open sense of what an image of a male in film might be. But then at the same time, there is this trend that I think I've seen, or that it's talked about in like masculine studies sorts of approaches to society, that there are sort of overall there are these images of men, you know, these really hyper-masculine images of men that we see, it seems more and more, you know, all the Rambo films and the Arnold Schwarzenegger films, the Vin Diesel films. And that there's just this, that maybe individually there might be an arc towards something more open about masculinity amongst particular artists' lives, but that sort of through Hollywood or the media or some sort of other force that is pushing all this other, these really tough, crazy sort of images of men at as we're saying, at our children.
If you take Falludi's argument, what that is the last desperate gasp of ornamental type of masculinity fighting to keep a toehold in some kind of definition which is no longer borne out in any real gender distinctions in terms of a job or task or anything like that.
Like this is not going to last. She's saying if this is the last dying gasp, we can hope.
Well, it's Vin Diesel's an interesting example in this movie. What was it, XXX? Yeah. He plays a James Bond figure, so he's still obedient to the dominant culture, like James Bond. He still follows the rules, but he's tremendously pumped up. He's a very strong actor. I think he's a good actor too, by the way. I'd like to see him try some other kinds of films. But he's got his tattoos and his shaved head and so forth. Or in a movie, The Fast and the Furious. That's where I came to like him, because he had another side to him that was hinted at in that film. I mean, you could see him really becoming friends with the agent who eventually betrays him, or you know, he has to deal with that. So friendship is not, you know, that goes back to White Heat. You know, Jimmy Cagney trusting Edward O'Brien in jail and paying for it. If a man lets his guard down, he can be in trouble.
Wow.
You know,
Well, but doesn't Vin Diesel have? I think I've seen ads for something where he's like he's got baby strapped on his, some sort of it's his every which way but loose.
The interesting thing about that is oftentimes though they'll take an actor who has sort of made his reputation in one and they'll go against type just out of because
it's funny.
Just because it's funny. It's like a gag. And
true.
Well, I also wonder if in some of the examples of how we see this change in male actors' career over their careers. I mean, what does it take for? I mean, how much sensitivity does a male actor need to show in a film for us to then go, wow, look at that sensitivity? I mean, it might not be very much. If they have had a career of being these tough, whatever, unemotional characters, and then we just see a little hint, like you were saying in Fast and Furious, a little hint from Vin Diesel. It's like, it's significant. It's like big because we see so little of it. It doesn't take much.
I agree. You could almost make a case for, probably a cliche, it takes a strong man to show his more sensitive side. I remember in 1980 being in Hollywood and being introduced to Telly Savalas. Now, he had just come off of Kojack. He was working on a film. He came over, and we ended up chatting for a minute, and he shook my hand, and it was the most gentle handshake. I mean, I still think about that. It wasn't some big power grip that he had to impress anybody. It was quite the reverse. I mean, really
well, you think of the stories about John Wayne, that he was in real life, nothing like the characters he typically portrayed. He had a different name, and he had, his interests were not guns and.
No, he didn't like horses at all, for example.
Right.
Right. So, I don't know about the last gasp theory, but we talk about war films. Often I start the course with one of my favorite films, The Sands of Iwo Jima, with John Wayne as Sergeant Stryker, who can't show his tender side because he's afraid it will weaken the men and they won't be able to survive the war. But eventually he relents and kind of adopts the son of a man who had been a friend of his, a young man who had rejected John Wayne, because John Wayne he's been rejected by his family. And so we see an unfolding of a tenderer side. Of course, it doesn't end well for him, if you remember. But war films are interesting because often they explore issues of masculinity. They often don't talk about issues of ideology. They will sometimes, but not often. They're looking at other things, like Platoon. It's really about the men and their relationship to each other. That's what I think that's what war films are about.
And I think if men who talk about their military or war experience, also that is what they talk about. Yes. They talk about those relationships that are formed, as part of that experience as being the most important part of it.
Yeah. So. Yeah, well, and I just had one of those moments where I completely forgot what I was going to say. So
well, I'll keep talking then. One of the things I wanted to sort of shift a little bit away from film just for a minute, which is television, in particular how fathers have been portrayed. I mean, if we look back to Father Knows Best, for example, the Donna Reed show, and the sort of all-knowing fathers, and who were always, sort of looked to as the last word, the final word on any family issue, and then we look at the way fathers are portrayed in television series and sitcoms today.
Homer Simpson.
Homer Simpson,
right,
or
a beard-swilling idiot who is reviled by a lot of people in the show, not his own family. Or have you seen these ads for? It's a DSL wireless network, and it shows the father rushing through the house with his computer, running back and forth and back and forth. I can get reception anywhere. I can get reception anywhere. There's one shot of a close-up of his son, probably 14 or 15 years of age. He's kind of looking at the camera, working, and he goes like this. In other words, casting, it's my father. It's not a gesture of love. It's a gesture of what an idiot.
Right. Yeah, and this is kind of what the image is. It's like the sort of incompetent sort of boob, especially around family, issues, or they're always having to be sort of like set straight by mom in terms of how how to deal with the kids or how to deal with any other family issues.
The whole Mr. Mom
or
thing.
Relationship issues.
Like the Mr. Mom thing, that it's not like Mr. Dad, it's Mr. Mom,
right.
because dads can't do what can nurture.
Right.
I mean, I suppose you could say this started with Dagwood in the late 30s and early 40s, but I don't know. We have that. But
you didn't have Blondie as the kind of competent. I mean,
no, that's true. She's more of a neutral figure. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's true. But I think there's an increase in images, the comic strip Foxtrot. The father is shown to be very, very similar. Someone who just can't hold it together. He's always screwing up, kind of a Homer Simpson, but without the beer. So there's no one clear way that these men are modeled to us anymore. I mean, we have a wide range of choices.
Well, and we have to make the choice to wrap up.
I'm afraid so.
Yeah. We're running out of time. You know, but I have to say that I feel like after this conversation, I have this whole list in my head, and I'm going to get written down after we're done of all these films I want to go back at and look at in the light of what we've been saying. And I think there's all sorts of layers of stuff that I feel like I wasn't thinking about. And so now
well, we need another half an hour sometime.
We do. We'll do that.
Yeah, come back.
We'll go watch some films, and we'll come back and talk
Alrighty.
So thanks very much.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's it's great stuff. I just saw recently a great film on about men and their relationships with each other. It's called The Groomsman. It's a new film, which if you want to see another film that sort of treats these issues, I'd recommend it.
So we want to say a little bit about our drop-in support group, which happens every Sunday night. This is the brochure, which you may see on display around town, or not. You can call our number, which appears at the end of the show. Get some more information. It's at 7 o'clock every Sunday night at 25 Roxbury Street, which is the Life Arts Center. It's right next to Aubuchon's Hardware at the back of the parking lot. Free parking Sunday nights.
Thank you, Life Art. They donate that space to us every Sunday.
Absolutely. And you just come in at 7 o'clock. You know, and I also want to say to women watching, you know, send the guys you know if you think they're feeling a little stressed out or whatever. I mean, it's just a time for men to talk. 7 o'clock, 7 to 9. No cost, no obligation.
That's right. Yep.
Easy to do.
And another thing we wanted to mention is this event coming up to raise awareness about violence against women.
That's right. It's called Walk a Mile in Her Shoes, a men's march to end rape and gender violence. And the idea is that men will...
I don't think that's going
to... I think that'll go on my... I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Maybe like this.
Yeah.
But
we're going to get some size appropriate shoes.
We're going to get some big shoes. Yeah. So we'll have more information on that. Where should we put this shoe?
The idea is that there'll be a group of men at the beginning of this march who are going to be wearing shoes like those.
Or maybe not quite like those. Bigger.
Bigger, similar. And for the purpose of showing our solidarity and raising awareness.
So give us a call if you want more information about that. We'll on future shows we'll be having more information, and there's registration forms and all that stuff.
That's right.
Next week, it's Rob
Colbert, who is the basketball coach, men's basketball coach at Keene State College. They're having a great year, and it'll be fun to talk with him about coaching men and maybe how the trends and how to do that may have changed over time.
So you've been watching The Men's Room. Please, not The Men's Show, but The Men's Room. Please join us again next week or on the web. You get our web address at the end of the show with the credits.
That's right. Thanks for tuning in.